Be the right club. Be the right club today. Yes!
Welcome to episode 13 of the Be the Right Club Today podcast, season 2. It's been a couple of weeks since the US Open. Hal, what was your thoughts on the US Open?
Well, I thought it was a lot of fun watching it. I loved LACC. I was curious as to how it was going to look. I've never played LACC, but it was pretty cool looking on TV. And the finish was awesome.
Yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah, it was.
Clark and Rory. But, how did you think the course played? There was a lot of uproar, as always, on social media about how the course played. What did you think about it?
I'm not sure you can do anything that you're not going to hear somebody's disagreement with the way it's going on social media, Yeah. I had a hard time with the 18th hole having a 50-yard wide fairway on the 18th hole. Mm-hmm. I never teed it up in a major championship where the last hole didn't require a little bit more preciseness than that required. Mm-hmm. One of the things that didn't surprise me, you see where the game is going. Everybody was following Ricky Fowler and hopeful. I was pulling for Rory and Ricky. Either one of them that won, I would have been happy with it, know. And Ricky was the shortest one of the leaders, and it showed at the end of the day. He just couldn't stay with it, and that's kind of where the game is going. And I think Rory had won 360 yards or something. Yeah. And of course, hats off to Wyndham Clark. He played fantastic. He played the cut. He played it. He knew his game, like he kept talking about. Doesn't really have a coach. Self-belief. Something that I've talked about with Paul Azinger on here a lot, and Parker. We talk about that as well. So
the shot Wyndham Clark hit on late Saturday night into 18. For those who have seen it, amazing club twirl. He absolutely flagged it after making a bogey in 17. I love that. I think that showed the confidence and self-belief. He bogeyed 17. Who knows how he finishes? And I don't know if he hit the pin, but he hit it like stiff on the last. And maybe club twirl of the year right there. I like the course it did separate a little bit who was playing the best, who was playing the worst. There was a little bit of separation there in the leaderboard, which shows it's really rewarding good shots and maybe punishing bad shots.
I like any golf course that requires you to hit good shots, And if mediocre golf shots will work, you can't call that a major championship golf course, No. Anyway, I thought LACC was a good venue. Not sure Brooks Koepka and I would agree on a lot of things, and we didn't agree on that.
There was some players that didn't seem too happy about it, but hey-ho. Rory, I want to talk a little about Rory. So close yet again to getting that major since, was it 10 years almost? Or nine years. I really badly want him to win one. I'm a big Rory fan. He's been close a lot of the time. I feel it's coming.
Well, it's a fine line between finishing first and second in a major championship, and a little bit here, a little bit there. Either way, somebody else not do something quite as well. One shot away. Mm-hmm.
72 holes.
72 holes.
It's unbelievable. He's
played great, and I think with everything with the LIV and the way that's all played out, and Rory, he even called himself the sacrificial lamb. And, I think for him to play as well as he did in the aftermath of all of that, I was proud of his play.
Yeah, I really thought he was going to do it. He just needed a few more putts to drop, but next month, July, the Open Championships at Hoylake, where Rory's won before. I'm not sure on the current weather situation over there. When he won there, it was playing pretty soft. There was a lot of rain. From what I heard recently, it's a little firmer over there right now. So we'll see if that suits him or not. But it'd be great to see him win that.
So I'm going to make a statement here about Rory.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, if he happens to listen to us, I'm gonna give him a little bit of advice. I think he never makes the putts down the stretch because they're too long.
Mm.
I think he plays fairly conservative iron shots coming down the stretch because he doesn't want to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And, he ends up having a lot of 30 to 50 foot putts. And who's going to make those? So, and I'm not saying step on the gas necessarily. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes just favoring a slope a little bit can get you 20 feet closer to the hole. And it's a fine line. I'm not saying, get on the pin so hard. That's not what I'm saying. But I think if I were him, I would analyze, okay, why am I getting 30 to 50 foot putts all the time?
Yep. It felt that way at the Old Course last year in the Open.
Yeah.
He just was never quite close enough where you felt it was holeable. But, I don't know if that's a strategy for him. Try to be cautious, like you talked about there. Try not to make a mistake. But I don't know. Who am I to tell Rory what to do or not? I can really break 75 these days. Wyndham Clark hit some amazing chip shots in that final round.
Yes, he did.
Some amazing up and downs, which is the subject of our interview today with Parker McLachlin. So you guys out there maybe know him as the Short Game Chef on Instagram. He's going to come on and talk a little bit about his career and his approach to short game. Are you looking forward to any questions?
I'm looking forward to, I need help with my short game as everybody else does out there. I'm pretty sure. If anybody's got it down solid, you can go ahead and turn it off right now. You don't even have to listen to Parker. Anyway, y'all enjoy.
This episode is brought to you by Holderness & Bourne. Let's talk about their polo shirts for a second. The fit and fabrics are one of my favourites out there, but Holderness & Bourne really changed the game with the collar on their shirts. You can really spot a Holderness & Bourne collar. It has premium interfacing, sewn-in collar stays, and an English cut that is modern but not too aggressive. Ultimately, what does that all mean? It means you look more polished and more put together. A great collar can frame your face and give you great posture. A great collar also stays sharp, especially in the heat of the summer as you sweat, or maybe you're sweating over those nervy 6-footers. Check them out at hbgolf.com and use code HSutton15 for 15% off your next order. Okay, we're delighted to welcome Parker McLachlin to the podcast this week. Parker, I really appreciate you joining us. I know you're in the middle of some hefty travel around the world, so thanks for taking the time today. For those that maybe aren't familiar with you, Parker, how about you tell us a little bit about kind of your life up to this point, your career and life in the PGA Tour and coaching and whatnot?
Yeah, so I was, thanks for having me on, first of all. I was born and raised in Hawaii and went to UCLA, got onto the PGA Tour 2007, ended up winning in 2008, and sort of have played on and off the PGA Tour for the last 15 years or so. And in the last, I'd say 3 specifically, I've been sort of transitioning a little bit more into the short game coaching world. Always had a great short game. But about 3 years ago, Kevin Streelman approached me to say, hey, I put some videos on Instagram under the handle Short Game Chef, and a couple days after that, Kevin Streelman had reached out and said, "Hey, I see you're doing some short game teaching. I'd love for you to take a look." And so, the first paid lesson I gave was to the guy ranked 93rd in the world, and then it's just sort of grown from there. And I've been lucky that a lot of guys have trusted me to take a look at their guys and gals have trusted me to look at their short games, and I've been fortunate to help about 50 people now out of the chipping yips, and so just this whole thing has sort of grown out of a whim of putting some short game instructional videos online.
So Parker, you said help them out of the chipping yips. I've said for quite a while that there's more people with the yips in chipping than there is putting by a long shot. So
I agree with you.
Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think with putting, usually the setup, in my belief, chipping setup is usually something that gets people into the wrong positions for chipping. A lot of players try to set up, amateur players try to set up the same way they do with a 7 or 9 iron as they do with their little chip or bump and run or pitch shot. And so, that usually leads to players sort of having, I call it the saves. So they get to the top of their backswing and then everything starts freaking out in their head and they try to save it. And so with putting, I don't notice that quite as much. With putting, the setups are usually, they're usually not as far off. And so that to me is usually where players can find their way a little bit more in putting, whereas in chipping, the second you get in that wrong setup and you start seeing some bad turf interaction at impact, that's usually when the chipping yips begin.
Don't you feel like there's too many people using too much legs in their chipping?
Absolutely. That's usually one of the first things I do is I'll shrink their feet, make them. I'll actually have them touch as a drill, have their feet totally touching, make them hit some shots from there, and they start to realize that the legs are really causing some bad habits and bad issues.
The more you use your legs, the harder it is to find the bottom, right?
Yeah, you got to have a consistent low point, and I don't mind if players hit the ground a little bit before impact, as long as you're doing it in the proper way. You can engage the bounce. So I'm not a huge believer in sending the low point way forward. I see a lot of people saying, hey, you gotta really move your body forward in the backstroke for a chip and a pitch shot, and I actually don't agree with that a ton. I like to stay a little bit more centered, and then sort of on the way down, yes, I want you to start moving towards the target, but boy, I don't want you first thing in your backstroke to start working towards the target.
Yes. That causes your left arm to get shorter because there's not enough room. Hey, you're talking to Hal Sutton right now. I've had these problems, Parker. I know all about it. You know how I beat it is shut my legs down and get my arms as long as I can get them. And if I give myself room to get my arms long, then I hit a pretty good shot. And
yeah, I usually like to have people turn the low body off and turn the rotation on a bit more. To me, that's usually a pretty good way to kind of just get things to be a little bit simpler for the amateur player, especially.
Wow.
So for the yips, this cause for people's you're saying people's setup's bad, and then they start seeing some ground contact issues, and that's where the saving comes from. They start doing some funky stuff with their upper body to try and save that. Now, I know you said you saved a lot of people from the yips. You've got a good program online, right? People can check out, and if they want some more information about that, right?
Yeah. So I built a website, shortgamechef.com, and on there I dedicate like 30 videos that walk you step by step through how to get rid of the chipping yips. And so we've actually had at least 10, 11 people, I think, that have gone through that program without even seeing me in person. They've gone through that program and they've sent me notes saying, cured the chipping yips. I just had a guy yesterday. He said, bought the program, watched it all through. Yesterday was my first day of practice, and I'm a completely new man. Thank you. And I was like, oh, just one day in. So I think the paradigm, a lot of the old ways of doing things, people have sort of fallen into a lot of that, and I think it doesn't work for every player. And so giving them a new perspective has been something that's been a breath of fresh air, and it really helps them out of those chipping yips.
So the ball changing, less spin. How do you feel like that's affected the chipping?
Well, yeah, I think equipment and agronomy, I think, have played the biggest role. So, I was usually pretty steep into it when I was playing on tour. I was sort of like a hinge, stab, and check kind of a guy growing up in Hawaii.
Right.
You know, a lot of grain, a lot of wind. I had to always sort of flight it really low, but we had the bigger grooves, right? When I was growing up, we had those bigger square grooves. So then all of a sudden the grooves changed, and then you got the agronomy where they're cutting the grass tighter around the greens. And then I think it was sort of Pinehurst when Michael Campbell won, where it was like you could kind of see everything. They started shaving everything off, and it wasn't always that rough that was really thick around the greens. That starts to change. Agronomy gets better, and now all of a sudden players just barely miss the green. It goes down into a low spot, really tight. Water accumulates down there, so it's usually a little bit muddy. And players, you know, they try to play the back of the stance, handle forward, you know, chop down and stab it, and you get a couple of those where you start hitting them a little bit heavy, and it starts playing in your head, so that's sort of the evolution, and the golf ball is obviously part of it as well because it wasn't spinning as much, and so you have to find a way to provide a little bit of height, a little softness, and a little bit of check, and so that's sort of where I come in with a lot of the stuff that I learned from Paul Azinger. Paul took me under his wing, and we spent a number of years. He was trying to help me out of some demons that I had on the golf course, and so we did a lot of stuff with short game, and that's really where I started to really understand how to use the bounce and how to hit those floaty, spinny pitch shots.
So, what degree wedge do you like, and what degree of bounce?
Yeah, so I've always used a 60, but I've sort of gone between some low bounces, some higher bounces. And so right now in my bag, I've got a 60 with a K grind, but it's a low bounce K, and it's got some pre-wear on the front edge and some pre-wear on the back edge. I think it's a great tool out of the bunker. That K grind has some special stuff out of the bunker. It's the same type of a grind that Justin Thomas uses on occasion. Rory just put it into play, so it's a pretty versatile wedge.
So, just my observation, most people that use a 60-degree wedge can't hit it hard enough. And when I first tried to use a 60-degree wedge, I found myself being short all the time. Never could make myself hit it hard enough. And have you found that with anybody else, especially older guys probably who we grew up with 56-degree wedges, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I actually had a parent ask me the other day about, hey, when should I introduce a 60-degree to my child? And I was like, as late as possible. Get them to learn how to figure out how to hit it high, figure out how to get some spin on it with a 52 or a 56. I wouldn't introduce a 60-degree until they're 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. I think it's a great skill to have, and you grew up with that 56. So did Zinger. You know, that was the highest lofted wedge you could find, and so I think that learning how to use a lower lofted wedge to hit a variety of shots, especially learning how to use a low lofted wedge to hit that high shot, I think that's really invaluable, especially for the young kids that are kind of growing up now. But as far as the older crowd goes, to me, I always, especially the older crowd that has maybe done it a certain way for so many years, I always take them back to like, hey, let's learn how to hit a bump and run with a 4-iron, and then let's move to a 7-iron, then let's go to a 9-iron, then let's hit a gap wedge. And if you can do all those well, then we can start to move to learning how to hit that pitch shot with a 56, and then potentially move to a 60. But I'm always a fan of like just making it as simple as possible. So, you know, putting a lower lofted club in their hand and having them find simple first.
So how far do you hit your 60-degree wedge, or how far? I mean, probably you can hit it further than you like to hit it. Am I guessing right?
Yeah. So I for me, I would say like a very full 60-degree. I usually feel like it's 90%, a 90% swing, and for me that's around that 85 to 90 yard range. The only time I will hit it hard is if it's downwind and I need to send it really high to get some, if it's like 100-yard shot, 102-yard shot downwind, that's when I'll try to send it high and swing more full. But every other 60-degree is, from that 90 yards down to 80 is sort of like a 90% swing. And but for me, I like to use 60-degree from like 50 yards and in off of fairway lie. I know my numbers and I know how far I'm going to carry it. I know what swing matches up with what carry number. And I do see a trend on the PGA Tour where guys are getting really good using that one club. And so they've just practiced with it so much. And the lies from the fairway on tour are so consistent that they know week in, week out that they're going to get good lies. And so they practice with that 60-degree and they get really good hitting a variety of shots with that 60-degree.
So you just brought up a point that my next question that I was going to ask you. And I want to make sure that people understood that you said on tour you're seeing that. In everyday golf, people rely on the 60-degree wedge far too much. And in my opinion, and you're talking tour players there right now who are doing this day in and day out all the time. And so they can make that club, they know where that club face is at, and they can make it be 56 degrees, they can make it be 62 degrees, whatever they need it to do. Much harder for an amateur player to do that. And, I mean, in my opinion, I think they should be forced into hitting the 60 instead of choosing the 60 at least 50% of the time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think, a couple things, play into it. Number one, the lies on the PGA Tour are very consistent. So guys are able to understand how much spin they're going to get because the lies are so consistent. When you go to your Muni course or even your local country club, they're not prepping for major tournaments. So the grass might be a little bit longer. You may not be able to access as much spin as a tour player does. So I'm always a fan of finding out how can I land this 1 to 2 to 3 yards on the green and let it roll out like a putt. To me, that's always a good philosophy, even from the bunker. I mean, I don't think that the amateur player needs to try to fly a 60-degree on a 20-yard bunker shot all the way to the hole and try to spin it. Grab your 56 or even your 52, learn how to chunk it, get it 2-3 yards on the green and let it roll like a putt. So I think throughout, short game inside of, let's say 30 yards, I'd say it's a good thought process to see if you can get it to just get barely on the green. Because usually I'm not if we're playing links golf, then you're trying to bump it into the hills and you're trying to land it short of the greens. But for American style golf, ideally you'd like to land it on the green because that's where you're going to get the most consistent first bounce. And that's really what you're looking for. If you can land it on the green and then have it roll like a putt, I think that's the ideal way to try to play a shot for American golf and everyday average golfers.
So you were talking consistent lies on the tour players' golf courses. One thing that the amateur deals with out there is into the grain chipping. Probably not nearly as much of that on the tour because it's prepped differently. What's your philosophy when you've got a shot that you're chipping into the grain, basically?
Yeah, I mean, that's just, no two ways about it. That's a hard shot. But, yeah, I mean, it's just, I tell people to just give themselves a little bit of grace. But there are a couple of ways to kind of handle it. Usually, if you can't, if it's one of those things, hybrid is obviously a good option. But if that's not an option, then you go down to like a little bit lower lofted club. So, if you're going to like a 7 or a 9 iron, that's usually going to be a better play. If you don't have that option to hit a lower shot like that, if you've got to have a little bit of a higher shot, rather than 60 degree, I'd go down to like a 56. And I would work the path more into out. I wouldn't want to get super steep on it unless the ball's sitting way down into the grain. But if it's sitting, okay, but it's still into the grain, I'd want to work that path a bit more into out to try to get it a little shallower. That usually, to me, helps to minimize the grabbiness on the grain.
I think that's really important what you just said, in to out right there, because everybody's working out to in on the lofted clubs. And that's contradictory to what their normal thought process is. So hope everybody heard you say that.
Yeah, that's an important one. I definitely noticed that quite a bit. And I like, for most pitch shots, I think that in to out path is more advantageous. You start working the path out to in, and for the amateur golfer, seeing that open face and seeing it looking like it's pointed for a right-handed golfer, pointed out to the right, immediately what they start thinking is, well, if it's pointed out to the right, I need to work my path to the left to square it back up. And I think that goes down a very tricky road because I just think it's a difficult proposition. The more out to in you go, the better your contact has to be and the less margin of error you have.
Parker, do you see any other? We talked a little bit about, stance width, someone looking like they're hitting about a 7-iron when they're about to chip. You talked a little bit about the concept of amateurs wanting to go out to in. Is there any other myths you hear a lot from amateurs that maybe our listeners can pay attention to and try and get away from?
Yeah, I mean, the whole hinge and hold thing is something that I see quite a bit. People come to me and they're like, I tried to hinge and hold and now I can't make contact with the golf ball anymore. And so, I just think that bounce is there to be your friend. I've talked a lot with Bob Vokey on his philosophies, and he's been making wedges for 35, 40 years now. And a lot of his philosophy is, well, we gotta find a way to get that shaft, to present itself. When you come here, you got to get that shaft to present itself back to neutral to be able to engage that bounce. So if you're a player that sets up with, if this is the ground and the shaft comes in this way, boy, you're really exposing a lot of leading edge. And so just teaching players the right way to be able to expose the bounce, because at the end of the day, the bounce is going to help you take a mediocre shot and turn it into a very reasonable shot that you can now have a 6, 7, 8 footer for par. Versus if you come in presenting a lot of leading edge, boy, you might only hit it 6 inches and you got to chip it again, or you freak out that you're going to hit it 6 inches and you release it and you blade it over the green. So both of those are not very playable, and they're gonna really hurt your scores.
You just presented a thought there that I think we need to talk about a little bit more. In the world of golf swing, we talk shaft lean a lot. In the world of short game, we don't want to talk shaft lean unless we're hitting a bump and run shot. And, why don't you talk about that instead of me talk about it?
Yeah, so I think that, it's like a lot of the things, and you notice some of the golfers that are great ball strikers, the Matthew Wolfs, the Victor Hovlands, even Rory, right? You look at these guys and what they do to create so much ball speed with their full swings, and then it's almost like a completely different game once you get inside of like 50 yards. Right. It becomes a completely different game where we want to almost do the opposite of what we were doing with full swing. We want to almost do the opposite. And so it's about compartmentalizing. Okay, full swing, these are almost, you look at even a driver swing. Driver swing, we want to be hitting up on it, right? And then you compartmentalize that. You don't want to make the same driver swing as you make with your 7-iron, right? We don't necessarily want to be hitting up on a 7-iron. So you almost have to compartmentalize all these different facets of golf, which is, almost why it makes it so difficult to really master all these different areas. which, you look at Tiger Woods and what he did through his career is like, okay, he was the best driver of the golf ball for a long time. And then all of a sudden he's the best iron player, and then he's a great wedger, and he's a great putter. It's like, it's hard to comprehend how he can compartmentalize all those different feels, all those different releases, and master all of them. You look at someone like Phil Mickelson, perfect example. Unbelievable at hitting flop shots and bunker shots because of his release, but not a great driver of the golf ball through his career, right? He sort of had it going both ways, but that was because of his release pattern. And you look at the different type of players and the different releases. You almost I teach my guys to compartmentalize it, and what works for a 40-yard pitch shot doesn't necessarily work for your driver, nor does it necessarily work out of the rough. You look at a Steve Stricker, probably one of the best pitch shot motions from a fairway lie that I've seen. Now, Stricker out of the thick, U.S. Open type of rough, I don't love that. I don't love that around the greens, because he's got to present more steepness in that angle of attack. And so being able to compartmentalize that, I think, is a really it's something that I'm seeing much more of these days, is players starting to compartmentalize driving, irons, pitch shots, shots out of the rough, bunker shots. These are all different facets of the game that you have to have a recipe, so to speak, for each of those.
The for the best players out there, a lot's made of like someone like Morikawa, for example, or like Hovland. The way they grip the club and their wrist angles can make it hard for them to maybe chip effectively. Do you find that, like, my assumption would be maybe players that talented can adapt their grip for different types of shots that they need, or do you see that maybe, is that risky? It might feed into their long game, their strengths.
Yeah, exactly. I think the wrist, the grip is probably like the last thing that I would try to change, especially on a really good player. Amateurs, if they grip it extremely weak and very much in the palm of their hands, then yeah, I'm gonna probably address that, because that'll help the whole rest of their game. But as far as like a tour player, someone that's world class, like a Colin Morikawa, to me, like, that's the last thing that I'm ever gonna try to change, because that's his one connection with the golf club, and he's so good in every other facet of it. Let's find other workarounds to get you to hit the shots that you want to hit without having to change your grip for this one particular shot.
Mm-hmm. And then can you add a little bit for our listeners? So for different types of shots, what kind of variables would you change in setup? So, for example, if someone's trying to play that chip shot that launches a little higher, lands a little softer, what kind of variables would you change in setup to help them hit that shot?
Yeah, so there's a handful of ways that you can, add or present some loft. One would be shaft lean, forward or backwards. So obviously, if a player's got the shaft leaning pretty far forward for a 7-iron or even a bump and run, just purely changing the shaft lean can really help that player not only present more loft, but also expose more bounce. So that's one way. Opening the club face would also be another way. And then actually lowering the handle would be a third way to sort of present more loft. I don't love that off of a fairway lie, but I think that you can manipulate at setup just the shaft and the club face to be able to present more loft for that player to want to hit a higher, softer one.
So explain lowering the handle. You said you didn't really like that. Tell us why.
Yeah, I don't love it out of a fairway lie because it exposes the heel a bit more. I love it out of a bunker because I do want to dig more, but out of a fairway, I don't necessarily want to, if I start digging more out of the fairway, I feel like I'm lowering my chances of success. Yeah. So I do like it quite a bit out of the bunker because, I know I'm going to have a ton of sand interaction.
Yeah.
But out of the fairway, I'm still trying to minimize the amount that I want to dig.
So, I'm quite a bit older than you, Parker. So I go back far enough that I would say we played a little bit closer to the ball than I would say the current players play. The current players stay tall as they can. And, you look back at Trevino and a lot of the older guys, Gary Player, they seem to get low with it. I recall that. I mean, Seve Ballesteros, I played a lot with Seve Ballesteros. He by far the best wizard I ever saw with one club. He could make that 56 degree do a bunch of different things, but he got low. And I'm sure you recall that watching him early on. He, if anything, I'd say he had far too much legs in there for the average person. But, who am I to say that? I mean, I think it hurt his long game a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I think you look at the amount of hands that Seve used. It's very hard to teach that. I think it's easier for the average golfer to understand body movements much easier than it is for them to understand how to time out their hands. And then, I remember talking to Jack Nicklaus about a year ago, and I asked him, what his gamer looked like, his highest lofted wedge, what would the bounce and the loft was. And he said he had a 58 degree, but it had 17 degrees of bounce. So that just shows you like the difference in turf conditions, right? These guys were playing much closer to the golf ball, trying to hit golf ball first. They weren't engaging that bounce quite as much, because if you engage a bounce on today's condition with 17 degrees of bounce, boy, that thing's just skipping and you're bouncing into it almost every time. But in the conditions that Jack was playing in his heyday, the grass was definitely much thicker. It was probably a bit wetter. So to me, things have evolved and changed agronomy wise, and so probably the highest bounce from the major manufacturers you're going to find today is 14 degrees of bounce. But you won't find hardly any tour player playing more than I'd say a 10 degrees of bounce in their lob wedge.
What was your highest lofted bounce when you played?
58 and 10 degrees,
10 degrees.
Is what mine was.
Yep.
The game has changed so much. We had more grass under the ball when we played. There was a cushion, if you will.
Yep.
I call Georgia grass the entitlement grass. If you grew up on Georgia grass and you went to Augusta the first time, you'd be freaked out when you saw your lie at Augusta, and you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do.
I've had several opportunities to build a golf course, and I never would put Georgia in because I felt like we were taken away from a young man or a young woman that was growing up. Learning how to chip off of Georgia is the easiest thing in the world. And, that's not reality. I mean, it's a grandfather grass. I mean, I'm a grandfather, I kind of like that cushion under the ball, but it's not good for my overall game, really, if I really still wanted to be a good player. And, so thinking about what we did a long time ago is kind of immaterial because everything was different at that point. So,
yeah, and that's where I feel like where I've resonated quite a bit with people and why I feel like what I'm saying people are connecting with, because, it's not that what people were teaching for the last 40 years is wrong. It's just that things have evolved and things have grown. And so the agronomy has changed. The golf clubs have changed. The golf balls have changed. The grooves on the golf clubs have changed. So there's a lot of things that have gone into this sort of evolution of short game. And as I started to sort of shine a light on it and bring some different thoughts as to how to present bounce and how to hit these high, floaty, spinny pitch shots, people started to really take to it, and I think that's been part of the reason why I feel like I've been successful, is that I'm talking about things that people have been thinking about, but nobody's really been saying that much. And I've gotten a ton of great feedback on every single day. People send me notes like, boy, I can't believe that I've been doing it, handle forward, ball position back, hitting way down on it. I try your method or your philosophy for the first time for 30 minutes, and I had the best session I've ever had. And so I get those notes every single day, and it's I think it's one of those things where it's now going to start to be talked about more and more often, as far as how to just the whole thing of like just throwing the ball so far back in your stance, handle way forward, just so that you can make good ball contact. I don't think I tell my players a lot. I'm like, I don't think we're not chasing good ball contact. That's not what I'm looking for inside of 30 yards off a fairway lie or even out of the rough. I'm not looking for good ball contact. I want you to understand how to chase a good attack angle. I want you to understand how to, out of the rough, use the cushion that's behind the ball of the grass, use that cushion in your favor to produce a soft landing shot. I don't want you, if you've got the grass looking like this, I don't want you to just get really steep, handle forward, to just try to hit the back of the ball. You're never going to be able to put any touch, finesse, softness on that shot. So just trying to change the whole philosophy and paradigm of what we've been talking about for the last 40 years in short game instruction to now something that's a bit more modern.
So let's cure one myth that's out there. All those guys got the ball back in their stance and the shaft forward. They're trying to keep the club head from passing their hands, and you're trying to present the club head passing the hands. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah. So I would say on like a flop shot, I'm trying to feel like the club head is passing my hands. On a pitch shot, I'm trying to feel like it's maybe it sort of stays with me.
Right.
Yep. But yeah,
you're not
I would
trying
say
to keep it ahead,
yep.
though.
Exactly right. Yeah, I'm not trying to keep the handle in front of the head the whole time. That to me is great for hitting a 7-iron, but not great for hitting a soft, floaty, spinny pitch shot.
So for everybody listening out there, the best players in the world don't attack a long iron like they attack their short iron. They don't attack their 60-degree wedge like they hit their driver. It requires, that's why they're practicing all day long every day. That's why they are playing all over the world, because they compartmentalize, just like you talked about. They know what they have in their hand at the time that they've got to hit the shot. One of the big things that I see everybody do, I made the statement in here the other day that this is one thing that makes golf mentally difficult, is that there's a decision to be made on every shot. You are being aggressive or conservative. It's mentally exhausting to play at the highest level. Am I right or wrong?
100%. Oh my gosh, you were so right. I think that was, when I was playing, full time on tour, that was probably the biggest thing for me was, I couldn't play 4 weeks in a row because I was so mentally exhausted after each round, and I used a lot of my mental energy on, what I felt like was creating magic on the putting green. I would spend so much mental energy visualizing the putt, seeing it going down a line, watching it go in the hole, seeing it at the bottom of the hole, hearing that ball go into the bottom of the cup. I would do all that stuff before I would hit a putt. And I was very good at putting. I led the tour a couple different years in strokes gained putting. But it wasn't because I had the best stroke. It was because I exhausted a lot of mental energy to try to create that really clear picture for myself. And so when I would come home from a round of golf, I was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to go and, to go out to a basketball game or to go out and watch a sporting event or do something like that. It was like well, I need to recover so that I can be ready to give this much mental energy the next day. So it's a very mentally taxing sport, especially at the highest level. If you want to be one of the greats, it takes a lot mentally to get there.
Yes, it does.
Parker, what lessons have you taken from your playing career that's helped you become a better coach?
I would say that I remind my players how great they are, especially my really good players. I remind them on a constant basis as to how good they are. I know, going through the ups and downs. I know that the value of confidence, that value of self-belief that we were talking about earlier, how it really is that intangible. So if I can continually remind my players how great they are, if they're in a little bit of a downturn, I remind them how great they are, and maybe it helps them a little bit get back onto that upswing.
Is that something that maybe you felt in your career maybe you didn't get from coaches enough, or it's caused you to think like that? Yeah.
I think that there's not enough. It's like when you have a coach, you're looking for that coach to help you solve a problem, to help you fix something. And so you're always looking, it's just part of the nature of it. You're just always looking at the negative to be like, hey, your hand position is too far here. We need to change it. Your club face is too much closed. We need to open it more. And so you're always looking at the negative side of it. Just that's the nature of a coach trying to fix a problem. And so I try to remind my players, yes, there's technical things that we can work on, but I also remind them, like, dude, you're awesome. Like, you got to remember how great you are, and how great that motion is, or how great, whatever it might be. I try to always, remind them of how special they are, how great they are, because golf is an impossible sport. You're never going to be perfect, and so reminding a player of how great they are, it's like they're not going to hear that very often, right? Like, especially from their inner circle. Like, their inner circle is there to give them truth, but if I can provide some truth and say, look, you're one of the best I've ever seen at doing this, boy, they take that to heart. It means a lot more.
So I think we can close this with what I'm about to say, Parker, because I want to hear your response to this. The golf ball owns every golfer in the world. It owns them. If they've done it long enough, it takes ownership over us as a player. And it's really bad at the amateur level. And as they age, it gets worse and worse and worse. And I get a lot of people that I have a lot of bad technique in here, and I can get them to get better and see it on video if I take the ball out and say, let's focus on a swing accomplishment, not on a result. How much does that play into the better players in the world? Do you see when they start to go bad, do you see the ball beginning to own them and own their mental thoughts?
Man, that's a really good question. I don't know if I've ever thought about it like that. I would say that for some of my amateur players, I'd say if I take a ball away, they can make some really good looking motions. When I put a ball there, they get very ball centric, ball oriented, and the ball owns them. For my tour players that I work with, they can do things with the golf ball that not many humans can do. And so they're almost of the mentality of, like, when the golf ball gets there, like when it's there, they almost want to show off more. And so they almost put their best stuff. They almost show me their best stuff when the golf ball is actually there. Now, if we're making a wholesale change and taking a player from, handle forward going up and then across to then shaft more neutral, building a bit more of a draw type of a path, they may struggle at first with that ball being there. They might be able to do it perfectly in the front of a mirror or without a ball there, and they might be able to do it perfectly. But the second that golf ball gets there, they go back to some old habits. So I'd say if we're really close with a really good player, they will pull those shots off, and they'll give me their best stuff when that golf ball's there. But if we're making like a bigger change, it becomes a bit more difficult. The golf ball does present some challenges if it's there. They can do it much easier when the golf ball's not there.
So what I was really wanting to say is, if people get too result oriented, the outcome, the ball really takes over and really owns them. And if let's say a handicapped golfer, and you can put any handicap you want on it, their turf interaction without a golf ball there can be much better than their turf interaction if that golf ball's sitting there, because they're having to produce a result, and they're scared of the result before they ever hit it, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I do quite a bit with. A lot of people come to me for, how do I pitch the golf ball? How do I chip and pitch the golf ball better? Amateur golfers. And so for those players, one of the things that I love doing is just, hey, make me some swings where you're just brushing the top of that grass. That's all I want you to do, is just brush the top of the grass. And then I'll even like hold the golf ball there and pretend that it's going to be there. I'll take it away and see if they can brush the grass, and then I'll put it back. But I try to get them, especially if I know that they're too result oriented, too golf ball oriented, I would try to get them back into that process of, all I want you to do is make me a nice motion where you're brushing the top of the grass. Because I honestly think that bad turf interaction is usually where the chipping yips start. If you get somebody that starts to enjoy the turf interaction and starts to see some good feedback from good turf interaction, that's when that freedom starts flowing back in. And then they stop getting so ball oriented. I think they get ball oriented because they're scared of the turf, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, Parker, you got any more questions? We wrap up.
It's been fun. I've struggled with my chipping as I've gotten older, so I love hearing you talk about it. And I actually played the other day and hit 3 great chips. So I was like, and all I was trying to do was keep my left arm as long as I could. I just didn't want it going here, So anyway,
yeah. I'm a huge fan of finding some width, right? Keep it like not getting narrow, right? But finding some width on both sides of it. I think that's very helpful if done in the right way. I think that's very helpful. It helps to present more bounce, and it just gives you that freedom to not be afraid of the mistake. Because if my mistake is an inch behind the ball and I'm presenting some width and some shallowness to it, boy, now all of a sudden I can present some bounce and I can still hit a pretty good shot that still has some spin on it, versus someone that's coming in extremely steep and hits an inch behind it. That person's probably going to be chipping again.
Well, we don't see any of the best players in the world with alligator arms. And you know what I mean by alligator arms. And
absolutely.
Narrow to narrow, like you talked about, So anyway, thanks for coming on. Tell everybody where they can find you at in the social media world.
Yeah, so my handle on Instagram is probably where I'm most active, is at Short Game Chef. Website, shortgamechef.com. And those are probably the 2 best places you can find me. All
right.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for coming on. I know there's a big time difference between us here right now, and I hope you have a great day, Parker.
Hey, thanks, you guys. Loved diving deeper in it with you. Thanks, Hal. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Parker. Have a good one. Well, Hal, that was a great interview with Parker. Some amazing insight there from a guy that's working with a lot of top players now with a short game.
He's, very kind, humble guy. He's soft-spoken. A lot of great points that he had there. I was on the edge of my seat listening to what he had to say.
Yep.
Bright.
Yeah. I think he addressed a lot of myths that are out there, especially in amateur players, on how to chip.
Well, and his thought about compartmentalizing the game, each shot, each part of the game. The driver is different than the irons, and the short game is different than the irons. You don't want to shaft lean. I mean, that's something that he's, trying to keep people from having in the short game is shaft lean, and that's what we want with our irons. A shaft lean. So.
Yeah, for shaft lean in the short game, you're just getting that leading edge.
Yeah.
Digging in a little bit. I think some players can make it work, special talents out there like Spieth and Scheffler, but I think for most of us, the majority of us, taking a little bit of that out can use the bounce a little
Those
more.
guys are working at their game all day long, every day. And so they can make things like that work.
Yeah.
For those that have a day job and golf is their hobby, not so much.
Yeah, getting a little more neutral setup and taking some of that shaft lean out. Check out Parker's stuff. He mentioned there in the interview, he's got a great Instagram page. It's got so much great information which you can check out for free, which is great. So check that out. I love what he talked about, for amateur players, getting the ball rolling out a little bit more.
Right.
I love that, and not try to fly it all the way all the time.
Well, I don't know if you noticed it or not. And if y'all missed this, go back and look at it. He actually talked about taking less loft out of the bunker and chunking it.
Yeah.
Which I can't tell you how many times I tried to do that in my lifetime of playing competitive golf. You're trying to hit a 20-yard shot with a 60-degree wedge, and you're trying to carry it all the way to the hole. That's a hard shot, even for the people that are playing golf every day at the highest level. And I mean, he actually used the word chunk, which I thought was pretty cool. I mean, how many of us really want to chunk it? But there are times and places to do it. And that's what everybody out there is trying to avoid, is the chunk. That's what shaft lean causes. And anyway, I thought it was very informative.
Yeah, it was great. It was really great. I learned a lot in that session. Segueing into the Dartmoor Club, Hal, your new course. What kind of short game shots are people going to see out there?
Oh, a lot of all the stuff that we've been talking about, but we're currently building the Punch Bowl green, and we just finished the Dale green, which has a Punch Bowl feel because it's kind of in the middle of a bunch of mounding that was already there.
Yeah.
So some really cool looking holes are being designed out at Dartmoor right now, and we're in what I call the asset of the property where it was mined 130 years ago. And my whole goal was not to mess that up instead of, going there, with dozers, you can go in there and do anything you want to, So I'm trying to get everybody to walk softly and quietly through that area.
Be careful with what was there. It's an amazing piece of the property. What do you think? I mean, I know with your design for the place, you're wanting to really test every club in the bag for everyone.
Right.
Are you gonna have people hitting all kinds of shots? You're gonna have your long bunker shots, your short bunker shots, your chip and runs, your lofted shots.
So if there's a shot that you don't have to hit out there, it's my fault, because I've been trying to bring everything into play.
Yep.
One of the goals that I had when I built Boot Ranch a long time ago was, if I died, would it teach my son all the shots? And that's kind of been my goal throughout Dartmoor too, is can I help everybody learn all the different shots that are required to be a good player within the golf course. So it's a tall task, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah, good. And if you haven't seen them already, there's some clips out there on the front end of some of our podcast episodes on YouTube, where you can see some clips of the property. And then segueing into that, the website, check us out on the website, halsuttongolf.com, for the academy here. We got an up and running blog page on there. We're trying to put a little bit more content on there for everyone. Hal's presentation from the PGA show this year, the Teaching and Coaching Summit's on there, so check that out. Check our clinics on there. We have our clinics every week, but there's a bunch of information on there, so check it out. But thanks, Hal.
Thank you, Jamie. Good job.
Yeah, we'll see you guys. Thank you. We'll see you guys next time.